The unexpected night that changed everything, a doctor, a CEO, and the fate of a hotel room. Hello, let's start another beautiful story. Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's go. Rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Waldorf Astoria, turning the Manhattan skyline into a blur of muted lights and shadow. Nathan Sullivan stood before the vast expanse of glass, his reflection a ghost against the stormy backdrop. The tumbler in his hand was half empty or half full, depending on how you looked at it. These days he wasn't sure about anything anymore. His phone buzzed again on the mahogany desk behind him. Another email from the board, no doubt. The quarterly projections could wait. Everything could wait. In the past 3 months since his divorce, Nathan had begun to question every decision that led him to this moment. 42 years old, standing alone in a luxury hotel suite, with nothing but the rain for company. The conference tomorrow would be another exercise in pretense. He would stand before hundreds of investors, present growth strategies, and paint pictures of future success with the confidence that had become his trademark. Nathan Sullivan, the tech wunderkind who turned a startup into a billion-dollar enterprise. Nathan Sullivan, who could solve any problem except the dissolution of his own marriage. He took another sip of whiskey, letting the liquid warm his throat. The divorce papers had been finalized last week, their marriage reduced to signatures and legal jargon. 15 years ended in 15 minutes at his lawyer's office. Clean, efficient, just like everything else in his life. A sound in the hallway caught his attention. The electronic whir of a key card, followed by the click of the door handle. Nathan turned, confused. He hadn't ordered room service. The door swung open, and a woman stepped in, pulling a small-wheeled suitcase. She was wearing scrubs under a rain-speckled coat, her dark blonde hair falling in damp waves around her shoulders. Their eyes met, and for a moment they both froze. "Oh, my God," she gasped, taking a step back. "I'm so sorry. I must have the wrong room." Nathan should have been alarmed, should have called security. Instead, he found himself noticing the exhaustion in her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands as she fumbled with her key card. "What room number were you assigned?" he asked, setting his glass down. She checked her keycard holder. 1214. "This is 1241, Nathan replied, a slight smile tugging at his lips. The numbers must have gotten transposed at the front desk. Relief washed over her face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "I'm so sorry. It's been a long shift and I clearly can't read numbers anymore." She turned to leave, but something made Nathan call out. "Wait!" The word surprised them both. "You look like you could use a drink. He gestured to the minibar. "Since you're here anyway." She hesitated in the doorway, one hand on her suitcase handle. Common sense said to decline, to go downstairs and sort out the room confusion. But there was something in his eyes, a familiar kind of loneliness that echoed her own. "I'm Emma," she said finally. "Emma Reynolds. Nathan Sullivan." He moved to the minibar. "What's your poison, Dr. Reynolds?" She raised an eyebrow. "The scrubs gave it away." That, and the look of someone who's had to make impossible decisions today. He knew that look well. He saw it in the mirror often enough. Emma stepped fully into the room, letting the door close behind her. "Gin and tonic, if you have it, and you're right about the impossible decisions." She shrugged off her wet coat, draping it over a chair. "Though I suspect your impossible decisions involve fewer cardiac arrests." "More board meetings and failed marriages," Nathan replied, preparing her drink, "though sometimes they feel just as fatal." Their eyes met again as he handed her the glass, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, perhaps, or understanding. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows, but the room no longer felt quite so empty. Emma took a sip of her drink, then settled into one of the plush armchairs. "So, Mr. Sullivan, what brings a man with failed marriages and board meetings to drink alone in a hotel room on a rainy Tuesday night?" Would you believe me if I said a scheduling mix-up? He smiled, and for the first time that evening it reached his eyes. And so began a conversation that would change both their lives, though neither of them knew it yet. As the storm raged, outside, two strangers found shelter in unexpected company, their chance encounter setting in motion a story that was just beginning to unfold. The ice clinked softly in Emma's glass as she leaned back in the armchair, her scrubs creased from the long shift. The luxury suite felt surreal after 18 hours in the emergency room, like stepping into another world entirely. A world where the lights were soft instead of harsh, where silence replaced the constant beeping of monitors, where time seemed to move at a different pace. "Tell me about your impossible decision," Nathan said, settling into the chair across from her. His tie was loose around his neck, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows, small breaks in what she imagined was usually impeccable corporate armor. Emma studied her drink for a moment. "Patient confidentiality," she said with a slight smile, but then her expression grew serious. "Though I suppose I could tell you about the choice, if not the details. Sometimes that's the hardest part of emergency medicine, not the technical skills, but the split-second decisions that haunt you." "How many seconds?" Nathan asked. "What? How many seconds did you have to make your impossible decision?" Emma closed her eyes, remembering. 30, maybe less. Multiple trauma patients from a car accident, limited resources, and I had to choose. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. "I chose wrong." Nathan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Did you? Or did you make the best decision you could with the information you had at the time? That's what they tell us in training. That's what the hospital lawyers say." She took another sip of her drink, but knowing that doesn't make it easier when you look into someone's eyes and realize you can't save them. The rain had softened to a gentle patter against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy around their conversation. Nathan stood and walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. "6 months ago," he said, "I had to decide between attending my wedding anniversary dinner and closing a major acquisition deal. I chose the deal." He turned back to face her. "The company gained $300 million in value. My marriage lost everything. Do you regret it?" "Every day." He paused. "And never. The company supports thousands of families, drives innovation that could change lives. But I've spent so long making the right business decisions that I forgot how to make the right human." "Uns." Emma stood, moving to join him at the window. Their reflections ghosted against the glass, overlapping with the city beyond. "Maybe that's why we're both here tonight," she said. "Two people who've gotten very good at making impossible decisions, but not so good at living with them." "Is that why you became an emergency doctor? To make those decisions?" She shook her head, a sad smile playing at her lips. "I became a doctor because I believed I could save everyone. Took me years to accept that I couldn't. Some days I'm still learning that lesson." Nathan turned to look at her, really look at her. The city. Lights caught the gold flecks in her green eyes, and for a moment he saw past the professional facade to the weight she carried. "Earlier today, before you came in, I was thinking about control," he said. "How we spend our lives trying to maintain it, only to realize that the most important things are the ones we can't control at all. Like accidentally walking into a stranger's hotel room." Emma's smile was warmer now, more genuine. "Exactly like that," he matched her smile. "Though I'm beginning to think it wasn't entirely accidental. The universe has a way of giving you what you need, even if it's not what you were looking for." Emma felt her pulse quicken slightly. There was something dangerous in this moment, in the way the conversation had shifted from professional confessions to something more personal. She should leave, get her correct room key, maintain the boundaries that kept her life orderly and predictable. Instead, she heard herself ask, "And what were you looking for, Nathan Sullivan?" He turned fully toward her. and the space between them seemed to shrink. I thought I was looking for answers about the divorce, about the company, about where I went wrong. His voice softened. But maybe I was just looking for someone who understands what it's like to carry the weight of other people's lives in your hands. The honesty in his words caught her off guard. In her world of emergency medicine, everything was immediate. Urgent, life or death. But this slow, careful revelation of truths in a quiet hotel room felt just as critical, just as life-changing. "I should go," she said, but didn't move. "You should," he agreed, equally stationary. Outside, the city continued its nighttime symphony of distant sirens and humming traffic. Inside, the air between them grew thick with unspoken possibilities. Emma thought about her empty apartment, about the long nights after difficult shifts, when she wished she had someone who understood, someone who knew what it was like to make decisions that changed lives or ended them. "One more drink," Nathan said, breaking the tension. "Tell me about a life you saved. Not one you lost, one you saved. I'll trade you a story about a company I helped build, one that actually made a difference." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "One more drink," she agreed, knowing as she said it that they were both lying to themselves. This wasn't about drinks anymore. This was about connection, about finding someone who saw past the surface to the scars beneath. As Nathan moved to refresh their glasses, Emma remained by the window, watching his reflection. She thought about all the paths that had led to this moment, all the decisions, right and wrong, that had brought them here. Maybe he was right. Maybe some things weren't accidents at all. The night was still young, and they had so many stories left to tell. "His name was Daniel," Emma said, swirling the last of her second gin and tonic. 10 years old, came in with a ruptured appendix, but everyone had missed the signs. By the time he reached me, he was in septic shock. She paused, remembering the small face that had looked up at her with complete trust. His parents had taken him to 3 different doctors over 2 days, but nobody caught it. They all said it was just a stomach bug. Nathan sat in rapt attention, his own drink forgotten. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 1:47 a.m., but neither of them seemed to notice the hour. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a glossy sheen on the windows that reflected the city lights like scattered stars. "I knew the moment I saw him," Emma continued. "Sometimes you just know. We had him in surgery within 15 minutes. His heart stopped twice on the table, but we got him back." A smile touched her lips. "He graduated middle school last month. His mother sends me a photo every year on the anniversary." "You remember them all, don't you?" Nathan asked softly. "The ones you save, the ones you lose." "Every single one." Emma stood, stretching muscles stiff from sitting too long. "Your turn. Tell me about one of your successes, one that made all the sacrifices worth it." Nathan was quiet for a moment, collecting his thoughts. 3 years ago, we developed a predictive algorithm for early-stage kidney disease. It wasn't sexy tech, no flashy apps or social media integration, just pure medical data analysis. He smiled ruefully. The board hated it. Said it would drain resources from our more profitable ventures. But you pushed forward anyway. I bet everything on it, mortgaged my house, leveraged my shares. Rachel, my ex-wife, she begged me to reconsider, said I was gambling with our future. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Emma was beginning to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. The algorithm now runs in over 200 hospitals nationwide, catches the disease an average of 8 months earlier than traditional methods. Thousands of lives improved or saved. And your marriage? The beginning of the end. Rachel said she was proud of what I'd accomplished, but she couldn't live with someone who was married to their mission. He stood abruptly, moving to the minibar. The irony is, I thought I was doing it all for us, building something meaningful, securing our future. I never realized I was losing her with every success. Emma watched him pour another drink, noting the slight tremor in his hands. We're quite a pair, aren't we? Both trying to save the world, one life at a time, and losing pieces of ourselves in the process. Nathan turned to respond, but was interrupted by the sharp buzz of Emma's phone. She pulled it from her scrubs pocket, her face immediately tensing as she read the message. "Everything okay?" Nathan asked. "It's the hospital." Her voice was tight. "The patient I lost today, his family is threatening legal action. They're saying I made the wrong call, that I should have prioritized him over the other victim." She looked up at Nathan, her earlier warmth replaced by professional distance. "I should go. I need to review my notes, prepare my statement for the investigation." "Emma, wait." Nathan stepped forward. "You don't have to face this alone. I have some of the best lawyers in New York on retainer. Let me help." She shook her head. "I can't. This isn't like business, Nathan. I can't just throw money and lawyers at the problem until it goes away. These are real people, grieving people, who lost someone they loved because of my decision. Because of circumstances beyond your control," he corrected. "You said it yourself. You had 30 seconds to make. An impossible choice. But I made the wrong one." The words burst from her with unexpected force. "A 28-year-old father of 2 died on my table while I was saving a 65-year-old man with terminal cancer. How do I justify that? How do I explain to his children that their daddy isn't coming home because I chose wrong?" The room fell silent. Emma's outburst hung in the air between them, raw and painful. Nathan took a step toward her, then another, until he was close enough to see the unshed tears in her eyes. "The same way I justify every decision that cost me my marriage," he said quietly. "By accepting that we can only make choices based on what we know in the moment. Everything else is just hindsight and regret." Emma looked up at him, their faces inches apart. The professional walls she'd maintained all evening were crumbling, leaving her vulnerable and exposed. It would be so easy to lean forward, to lose herself in the comfort he offered. Too easy. "I have to go," she whispered, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. Nathan reached up slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I know." At that moment stretched between them, electric with possibility. Then Emma's phone buzzed again, shattering the spell. She stepped back quickly, gathering her coat and bag. "Thank you," she said, her hand on the door handle, "for understanding, for everything." "Emma," his voice stopped her. "Whatever you decide about the investigation, about the lawyers, you know where to find me." She nodded once, not trusting herself to speak, and slipped out into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind her with a finality that echoed in the empty corridor. Nathan stood alone in his suite, staring at the space where she had been. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. But inside, the shadows of their shared confessions lingered, whispering of choices made and paths not taken. The conference room buzzed with anticipation as Nathan adjusted his tie, his presentation ready on the screen behind him. He'd managed 2 hours of sleep before dawn, but adrenaline and strong coffee kept him sharp. As board members and investors filed in, he caught his reflection in the window, composed, confident, every inch the successful CEO they expected to see. Only he knew how much of it was performance. His phone sat silent on the podium, though he'd checked it a dozen times. Since Emma left, he had her number. She'd written it on a hotel notepad before rushing out, though neither of them had acknowledged what that meant. He hadn't called, she hadn't either. Mr. Sullivan, his assistant Rebecca, appeared at his elbow. "Everyone's ready." Nathan nodded, squaring his shoulders. This was his element, the corporate battlefield where every decision was measured in dollars and market share. Yet as he began his presentation, his mind kept drifting to last night's conversation about success and its true cost. Our Q3 projections show a 27% increase in market penetration, he said, clicking through his slides. But more importantly, our healthcare division has expanded its reach to over 300 hospitals nationwide. He found himself emphasizing the medical technology innovations, the lives improved, the real-world impact of their work. The board members exchanged glances. They were used to hearing about profit margins and market caps, not patient outcomes. An impressive presentation, Nathan, William Blackwood, the lead investor, said afterward. Though I noticed you spent considerable time on the healthcare initiatives, I hope you're not losing focus on our core business objectives. Actually, I've been thinking about restructuring our priorities, Nathan heard himself say. The words surprised him as much as they did Blackwood. Our medical technology division has shown consistent growth, and the social impact doesn't pay dividends, Blackwood interrupted. Your recent divorce isn't causing you to reevaluate things, is it? Nathan felt a flash of anger. My personal life has nothing to do with this. But yes, I am reevaluating our company's potential to make real change in the world. The algorithm we developed for kidney disease was just the beginning. Nathan, Blackwood's voice was patronizing. You've built an impressive company by making smart, profitable decisions. Don't let emotion cloud your judgment now. The words echoed in Nathan's mind as he rode the elevator back to his suite. Emotion clouding judgment. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been warned about during his divorce? What he'd cautioned countless colleagues against over the years? He opened his hotel room door and stopped short. The space felt different in daylight, haunted by the ghost of last night's conversations. Emma's empty glass still sat on the side. Table, a faint trace of lipstick on the rim. His phone buzzed, a text from Rachel, his ex-wife. Heard about the board meeting. Called to make sure you're okay. Dinner tonight? Nathan stared at the message. 6 months ago, he would have jumped at this opening, this chance to rebuild what they'd lost. Now, a knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Rebecca, looking concerned. Sir, there's a situation developing that requires your immediate attention. The press got wind of some layoffs at our Austin office, and they're running a story about corporate callousness. They're particularly focused on a former employee who lost his health insurance just before his daughter's surgery. Nathan felt the weight of leadership settle back on his shoulders. More impossible choices, more lives affected by his decisions. He thought of Emma, somewhere in the city right now, probably facing her own ethical battles in the ER. Get me everything you have on the Austin situation, he said. And Rebecca, find out if we can reinstate that employee's health coverage retroactively. Sir? Rebecca looked confused. The legal team advised against any actions that might imply wrongdoing. Some things are more important than legal liability. Nathan loosened his tie. Also, cancel my dinner plans for tonight. I'll be working late. After Rebecca left, Nathan picked up Emma's glass, his fingers tracing the lipstick mark. He pulled out his phone and typed a message. Thinking about what you said regarding impossible choices. Hope you're holding up okay. If you need someone to talk to. He stared at the unsent text for a long moment before deleting it. Instead, he opened his laptop and began researching medical malpractice cases similar to Emma's situation. If she wouldn't accept his help directly, maybe he could find another way to support her. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as Nathan immersed himself in legal documents and medical terminology. On his desk, Emma's number on the hotel notepad seemed to watch him, a reminder of connections made and opportunities not yet taken. His phone buzzed again, another message from Rachel. He left it unread. For the first time since their divorce, he felt no urge to respond. Something had shifted during last night's rain-soaked conversations, though he wasn't ready to name it yet. Outside his window, New York continued its relentless pace, millions of lives intersecting in countless ways. Somewhere in that urban maze, Emma was making her own impossible choices, fighting her own battles. Nathan wondered if she too felt the weight of last night's unfinished conversation, the pull of words left unsaid. He picked up the hotel notepad with her number, then reached for his phone. Sometimes the biggest risks weren't in business decisions or medical procedures, but in allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to need someone, to care. His finger hovered over the keypad. Outside, clouds gathered again, promising another stormy night in Manhattan. The emergency room at Mount Sinai pulsed with its usual controlled chaos as Emma finished her third cup of coffee. She'd gone straight from the hotel to the hospital, stopping only to change into fresh scrubs. Sleep felt like a distant memory, but her mind was sharp, perhaps too sharp, replaying fragments of last night's conversation between treating patients. Dr. Reynolds, a nurse, appeared at her elbow. "The hospital's legal team is waiting in the conference room." Emma nodded, pulling her stethoscope from her neck. The weight of yesterday's failed case pressed down on her with each step toward the meeting. She'd reviewed her notes obsessively since receiving the message in Nathan's hotel room, but the facts remained unchanged. 2 critical patients, limited resources, and 30 seconds to choose. The conference room felt sterile under fluorescent lights. 3 lawyers and the hospital's risk management director sat waiting, their expressions carefully neutral. "Dr. Reynolds," Barbara Chen, head of legal, began. "We've reviewed your initial report regarding the Wilson case. We need to discuss your decision-making process during the incident." Emma sat straight-backed in her chair. Both patients presented with critical injuries from the same vehicle collision. Mr. Wilson had a severe thoracic trauma with internal bleeding. The other patient, Mr. Reeves, showed signs of imminent cardiac failure. "And you chose to prioritize." "Mr. Reeves," Barbara stated, "despite his advanced age and pre-existing conditions. I made my assessment based on immediate survival probability. Mr. Reeves's condition was deteriorating more rapidly." "A 65-year-old man with terminal cancer," interrupted David Foster, another lawyer. "While Mr. Wilson was 28, healthy, with 2 young children." Emma felt her jaw tighten. "I don't make triage decisions based on a patient's age or family status." "No," Barbara agreed, "but a jury might. The Wilson family's lawyer is painting a compelling narrative. A young father denied care in favor of an elderly patient with limited life expectancy." The words hit Emma like physical blows. She thought of Nathan's offer of legal help, quickly pushed it aside. This was her burden to bear. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "For now, we're gathering information. But Dr. Reynolds..." Barbara hesitated. "You might want to consider taking some personal time, at least until this situation resolves." "You want me to stop practicing?" Emma's voice rose slightly. "We're already short-staffed and..." A rapid series of beeps interrupted her. Code blue, alert on her pager. Emma was on her feet instantly. "We're not finished," David Foster protested. "Yes, we are," Emma said, already moving. "Someone's dying." She ran through the corridors, her mind shifting automatically into emergency mode. This was where she belonged, not in sterile conference rooms defending impossible choices, but in the chaotic reality of saving lives. The code was for a woman, in her 30s, collapsed in the ER waiting room. Emma took in the scene at a glance. Patient unconscious, security guard performing chest compressions, family member crying nearby. "What's her history?" Emma demanded, dropping to her knees beside the patient. "Lauren Abbott, 34, a nurse reported, was waiting to be seen for severe abdominal pain. collapsed about 2 minutes ago. Emma's hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking pupils, pulse points. How long was she waiting? 3 hours. We were backed up with trauma cases. 3 hours. If they hadn't been short-staffed, if she hadn't been in that meeting. Emma pushed the thoughts aside. Focus on on this patient, this moment. Get me a crash cart and call surgery, she ordered. I'm feeling a pulsating mass in the abdomen, likely a ruptured aneurysm. Her mind flashed to Daniel, the appendicitis case she'd told Nathan about. Another patient who'd waited too long. The next 20 minutes passed in a blur of medical procedures and rapid decisions. By the time they wheeled Lauren Abbott to emergency surgery, Emma's scrubs were soaked with sweat, but the patient was stable. In the aftermath, she found herself in the doctor's lounge, hands shaking slightly as she poured another cup of coffee. Her phone sat heavy in her pocket, Nathan's number stored but untouched. She pulled it out, staring at his contact information. He would understand this feeling, the weight of quick decisions, of lives depending on your judgment. He would listen, offer that same quiet support he'd shown last night. It would be so easy to call, to lean on someone who truly understood. Too easy. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Reynolds? It was Barbara Chen again. We need to finish our discussion. Emma slipped her phone back into her pocket, unopened. I just saved someone's life, she said quietly. Someone who might have died if I'd taken that personal time you suggested. So, with all due respect, I'll continue practicing while we handle the Wilson case. My patients need me. Barbara's expression softened slightly. Emma, this isn't just about your patients. We need to protect the hospital and you. The Wilson family's lawyer is requesting all your records, every decision you've made in the past year. They're building a pattern, trying to prove you make emotionally compromised choices. Emma thought of last night, of sharing her deepest fears with a stranger in a hotel room, of the comfort she'd found in his understanding, and the fear that had made her run. My choices aren't emotionally compromised, she said firmly. They're human. And if that's not good enough for the hospital, you can have my resignation. She walked past Barbara, heading back to the ER. Her phone buzzed, a text from the hospital administrator requesting an urgent meeting. Above that notification was her unsent draft to Nathan. Last night meant she deleted the draft without finishing. There were patients waiting, lives to save, choices to make. Everything else, including the growing ache in her chest when she thought of rain-streaked windows and honest conversations, would have to wait. But as she stepped back into the controlled chaos of the ER, Emma couldn't help wondering if she was making another impossible choice, and if this time she was choosing wrong. Thunder rolled across Manhattan as Nathan's town car pulled up to Mount Sinai Hospital. He hadn't planned to come here, hadn't planned anything beyond his urgent need to escape the suffocating atmosphere of his hotel suite. But when his driver had asked for a destination, this was the address he'd given. Wait here, he told the driver, stepping out into the rain. I won't be long. He had no real reason to be here, no excuse if he ran into Emma. The coffee cup, in his hand, from her favorite shop according to the hastily conducted research on his phone, felt like a flimsy pretense. Still, he found himself walking through the sliding doors into the emergency room. The controlled chaos of the ER hit him immediately. The sharp antiseptic smell, the hurried movements of medical staff, the quiet desperation of waiting families. This was Emma's world, so different from his sterile boardrooms and pixel-perfect presentations. Can I help you? A nurse at the reception desk eyed his expensive suit with mild suspicion. I'm looking for Dr. Reynolds, he said, trying to sound casual. Emma Reynolds. Dr. Reynolds is in a meeting with administration, the nurse replied. You'll have to... She was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance. Paramedics burst through the doors with a gurney, shouting medical terms Nathan didn't understand. Behind them, a news crew tried to follow, cameras rolling. 27-year-old male, corporate protester, one paramedic announced, collapsed during the demonstration outside Sullivan Tech's downtown office. Severe allergic reaction, possible. Endophylaxis. Nathan froze. Sullivan Tech, his company. The protests over the Austin layoffs had escalated faster than anyone predicted. "Where's Dr. Reynolds?" someone called out. "Fourth floor, but..." Nathan was already moving toward the elevators, his urgency now professional rather than personal. He needed to understand what was happening at his office, needed to manage this situation before it spiraled further out of control. The elevator doors opened on the fourth floor, and he nearly collided with Emma herself. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back messily, dark circles under her eyes. She stopped short when she saw him. "Nathan, what are you—" "There's a protester downstairs," he cut in. "From outside my office, I need to know what happened." Emma's professional mask slipped into place. "I don't discuss patients with non-family members, Mr. Sullivan." "Emma, please, my company's involved. If something happened during those protests—" "Dr. Reynolds!" A voice interrupted them. Barbara Chen from Legal Affairs strode down the hallway. "The board has made their decision. They're suspending you pending the Wilson investigation." Emma's face went pale. "They can't. We're already understaffed and—" "It's not negotiable," Barbara said firmly. "The publicity from the Wilson case is growing. Social media is painting you as an emotionally compromised doctor who plays God with patients' lives. The hospital can't risk—" "She was right." Nathan's voice cut through the tension. Both women turned to look at him. "Excuse me?" Barbara asked. "And you are?" "Nathan Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Tech." He stepped forward. "And I've spent the last 24 hours researching similar triage situations. Dr. Reynolds made the correct medical decision in the Wilson case. I have data from hundreds of similar scenarios that prove it." Emma stared at him. "You researched my case? I told you I wanted to help." His eyes met hers. "Let me help now." The moment was broken by another commotion. The protester was being rushed off the elevator on a gurney, medical team in tow. Emma's doctor instincts took over and she moved toward the group, but Barbara blocked her path. "You're suspended, Dr. Reynolds. You can't treat patients." They watched as the medical team wheeled the protester down the hall, his condition clearly deteriorating. Emma's hands clenched at her sides, her whole body tense with the need to help. Nathan made a split-second decision. "Ms. Chen, your hospital is about to face a massive PR crisis. A protester falls ill outside my company's office, is rushed to your ER, and dies because you prevented your most qualified emergency physician from treating him. How do you think that will play in the media?" Barbara hesitated. Emma didn't wait. For permission, she was already running down the hall toward her patient. "This isn't over," Barbara called after her. "No," Nathan agreed, "but it's about to change." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my legal team. We're going to fix this. All of it. The Wilson case, the protests, everything." "Why?" Barbara asked sharply. "Why involve yourself in this?" Nathan watched Emma work, her movements swift and sure as she fought to save the life of someone who had been protesting his company. In that moment, everything became clear. "Because some things matter more than corporate liability," he said quietly. "Some things are worth fighting for." His phone buzzed. Rachel again, pressing for an answer about dinner. Down the hall, Emma was intubating the protester, calling out orders, fully in her element. Two worlds colliding in a hospital corridor, and Nathan finally knew where he belonged. "Get me everything you have on the Wilson case," he told Barbara. "And cancel my dinner plans," he added to himself, deleting Rachel's messages unread. The storm outside grew stronger, rain lashing against the windows, but inside the hospital, something else was building. A different kind of storm, one that would change all their lives in ways none of them could predict. Emma glanced back at him once, her eyes full of questions she couldn't ask while saving a life. Nathan nodded slightly, a promise in the gesture. They would talk later, would figure this out together. For now, they each had battles to fight, wrongs to right, lives to save in their own ways. The coffee cup, now cold, sat forgotten on a nearby counter, a small reminder of how the simplest gestures could lead to the most complicated choices. The hospital cafeteria at midnight was a liminal space, too late for the dinner rush, too early for the breakfast crowd. Emma sat at a corner table, an untouched sandwich in front of her, while Nathan pored over documents spread across the table. "The Wilson family's lawyer is building their case on emotional appeal," he said, highlighting another passage. "They're painting you as detached, clinical, someone who makes decisions based on cold statistics rather than human factors." "Isn't that exactly what you're doing?" Emma asked quietly. "Building a defense based on statistics and similar cases?" Nathan looked up, caught by the conflict in her voice. "I'm trying to protect you. By proving I was right. That doesn't bring back a 28-year-old father." She pushed away her sandwich. "The protester today, is he stable? Deflecting to other patients won't make this go away." Nathan set down his highlighter. "But yes, he's stable, thanks to you. The same way Mr. Reeves is alive, thanks to you. At the cost of another life." Emma stood abruptly, pacing the empty cafeteria. "You don't understand, Nathan. You can't fix this with lawyers and data points. Every time I close my eyes, I see Mr. Wilson's face. I hear his wife screaming when I had to tell her." Her voice broke. Nathan rose, moving toward her, but Emma held up a hand to stop him. "Don't, please. I can't." "Can't what?" "Can't let you make this better. Can't let you swoop in with your resources and your connections and just fix everything." She turned to face him. "Do you know what I did after I stabilized that protester? I looked up your company's layoff policies. The man who lost his insurance before his daughter's surgery. He had worked for you for 12 years. Nathan felt the accusation in her words. "The Austin situation is complicated. Market forces, board pressures." "Market forces?" Emma's laugh was bitter. "That's what we both do, isn't it? Hide behind professional language when we're too afraid to face the human cost of our choices. You have market forces. I have triage. Protocols. That's not fair." "No? Then tell me why you're really here, Nathan. Why you spent hours researching my case. Why you're sitting in a hospital cafeteria at midnight instead of having dinner with your ex-wife." The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken implications. Nathan stepped closer, close enough to see the exhaustion etched in the fine lines around her eyes. "Because you understand," he said softly. "Because when I told you about the kidney disease algorithm, you didn't ask about the profit margins or market share. You asked about the lives saved." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "Because ever since that night in my hotel room, I can't stop thinking about what really matters." Emma's professional facade cracked slightly. "Nathan." His phone. It buzzed. A message from William Blackwood. The board was calling an emergency meeting about the protests. In the same moment, Emma's pager went off. "Mr. Reeves," she said, reading the display. "He's coding." They stood frozen for a moment, each pulled by their respective obligations. Then Emma turned and ran toward the ICU, leaving Nathan alone among the scattered legal documents. He watched her disappear through the cafeteria doors, then looked down at Blackwood's message again. The board wanted immediate action on the protests, a show of corporate strength. They would expect their CEO to prioritize shareholder interests over public sentiment. Nathan began gathering the documents, his mind racing. There had to be a way to resolve this that served both justice and compassion. He thought about what Emma had said about hiding behind professional language, about the human cost of their choices. His phone buzzed again. Rachel, a third message about dinner. We need to talk about us, she'd written, about starting over. Nathan stared at the message for a long moment before typing a response. There is no us anymore. I'm not the same. In person I was. He sent the text, then pulled up his email and began composing a message to his board. The subject line read, "Immediate action required. Austin office revisions." Hours later, Emma found him still in the cafeteria, surrounded by new stacks of papers, corporate policies, healthcare provisions, restructuring proposals. "Mr. Reeves?" he asked without looking up. "Stable," she replied, sinking into a chair. "We got him back. Again." She looked exhausted, but somehow lighter. "You're still here." Now Nathan did look up, meeting her gaze. "I'm trying to fix something. Not you. You don't need fixing. But maybe the system that forces both of us to make impossible choices." He pushed a document toward her. "I'm reinstating health coverage for all laid-off employees, retroactive to their termination date, and restructuring our entire corporate healthcare policy. The board will fight you on this. Let them." His voice was firm. "I'm done letting market forces dictate human costs." Emma reached for the document, her fingers brushing his. Neither. Pulled away. "I can't promise I'll always make the right choices," she said quietly. "No one can." Nathan turned his hand, catching her fingers with his. "But maybe we can help each other live with the choices we make." Outside the cafeteria windows, the first light of dawn was breaking over Manhattan. Another day of impossible. Decisions awaited them both, but for now, in this liminal space between night and morning, they had found something rare and precious. Understanding. Emma's pager remained silent. Nathan's phone lay dark. In the peaceful stillness of the empty cafeteria, they allowed themselves this moment of connection, knowing it might be their last chance before their separate worlds demanded their attention once again. The news broke at 9 a.m. Sullivan Tech. CEO defies board, announces major policy changes. Nathan watched the headlines scroll across his phone while standing in his hotel suite, his tie hanging loose around his neck. The morning shows were already dissecting his early morning press release about reinstating healthcare coverage and restructuring corporate policies. His inbox was a battlefield of caps lock subject lines and exclamation points. William Blackwood's message stood out. "Emergency board meeting, 10 a.m., your presence mandatory." A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Rebecca, looking more concerned than he'd ever seen her. "Sir, the board members are gathering in the conference room. Mr. Blackwood is not happy." She hesitated. "And there's something else. A reporter from the Wall Street Journal is asking for comment about your involvement in the Mount Sinai malpractice case." Nathan's stomach tightened. He hadn't wanted Emma dragged into this. "Sir," Rebecca pressed, "what should I tell them?" "Nothing," he said firmly. "Direct all press inquiries to legal." He grabbed his jacket. "And Rebecca, clear my schedule for the afternoon. All of it." The conference room felt like a pressure cooker when Nathan walked in. 8 board members sat around the table, with William Blackwood at the head, his face flushed with barely contained fury. "Have you lost your mind?" Blackwood demanded before Nathan could even sit down. "Retroactive healthcare coverage? A complete restructuring of corporate benefits? Do you have any idea what this will cost shareholders?" "Less than the lawsuit and PR nightmare we're facing," Nathan replied calmly, taking his seat. "Our stock is down 12% since the protests began, which is why we needed a show of strength, not whatever this bleeding heart nonsense is." Blackwood slapped a tablet onto the table. "And now I hear you're involved with some doctor at Mount Sinai, a doctor facing a malpractice suit." Nathan kept his voice level. "Dr. Reynolds is one of the most respected emergency physicians in New York. Her case has nothing to do with—" "It has everything to do with this," Blackwood's fist hit the table. You're making emotional decisions, Nathan. First the divorce, now this. Infatuation with a doctor. The board has concerns about your judgment. My judgment. Nathan stood, slowly. My judgment built this company from nothing. My judgment developed medical technologies that save lives every day. And my judgment says we've lost our way, prioritizing profit over people. That's what companies do, Nathan. We're not a charity. No, we're better than that. Nathan looked around the table. Or we should be. Blackwood's voice turned dangerous. The board has already voted. Either you retract this morning's announcement, or we'll be forced to take action. You mean replace me? Nathan smiled without humor. Check your contracts, William. I still own controlling interest in the company. You can't remove me without my cooperation. No, Blackwood agreed, but we can make things very difficult for everyone involved, including your doctor friend. Nathan felt ice in his veins. Leave her out of this. Too late. The press is already digging. A CEO romantically involved with a doctor facing a malpractice suit, using company resources to defend her. The optics are problematic. Nathan's phone buzzed. A text from Emma. Need to talk. It's important. Think carefully about your next move, Blackwood continued. Your reputation, your company, your friend's career, all hanging in the balance. Nathan looked down at Emma's message, then back at the board. You know what's interesting about making impossible choices, he said quietly. Eventually you realize they're not impossible at all, just difficult. He buttoned his jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? Blackwood demanded. We're not finished. Yes, we are. Nathan paused in the doorway. And William, I want your resignation on my desk by morning. The hospital was quieter than usual when Nathan arrived. He found Emma in the doctor's lounge, still in her scrubs, staring at a newspaper. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. You should have told me what you were planning, she said, pushing the paper toward him. The headline read, Corporate Revolt at Sullivan Tech, CEO's personal life under scrutiny. I was trying to protect you. I don't need protection, Nathan. I need... She ran a hand through her hair in frustration. The Wilson family's lawyer is using this, claiming my judgment is compromised because of my relationship with you. What relationship? The words came out harsher than he intended. We met 3 days ago. And in those 3 days, you've restructured your company's healthcare policy, defied your board, and involved yourself in my legal case. She stood, pacing the small room. They're saying I prioritized saving your protester because of our connection. That's ridiculous. Is it? Emma stopped pacing, turning to face him. Would you have done all this if we hadn't met that night? If we hadn't talked about what really matters? Before Nathan could answer, Emma's pager went off. She checked it and paled. What is it? He asked. Mr. Reeves. He's crashing again. She moved toward the door, then hesitated. Nathan, Go, he said. Save your patient. Everything else can wait. She nodded once and ran out, leaving Nathan alone with the newspaper and its damning headlines. His phone buzzed again. Rebecca, warning him that the press was gathering outside the hospital. Nathan loosened his tie, feeling the weight of multiple worlds colliding. He thought he could fix everything with bold gestures and corporate policy changes, but some things couldn't be fixed. They could only be faced with courage and honesty and whatever grace you could muster. He pulled out his phone and began typing a message to his PR team. It was time to stop protecting reputations and start telling the truth. All of it. Outside the doctor's lounge, he could hear the rhythmic chaos of a code blue in progress. Emma was in there somewhere, making her own impossible choices, fighting her own battles. The least he could do was fight his with equal courage. The message he typed was simple. Schedule a press conference. Today. It's time to talk about what really matters. The hospital's press room wasn't designed for this kind of crowd. Journalists packed the small space, cameras and microphones creating a forest of technology. Emma watched the scene from a monitor in the doctor's lounge, her heart racing faster than it had during any emergency procedure. On screen, Nathan approached the podium. He'd shed his usual corporate armor, no tie, collar open, sleeves rolled up. He looked tired but determined, more human than CEO. 3 days ago, he began, I met someone who reminded me what it means to make decisions that truly matter. Emma's pager buzzed. She ignored it, eyes fixed on the screen. We live in a world of impossible choices, Nathan continued. In boardrooms and emergency rooms, we're asked to make decisions that affect people's lives. But somewhere along the way, many of us, myself included, lost sight of what really matters. The door opened, and Barbara Chen walked in. Dr. Reynolds, the Wilson family is here. They're requesting a meeting. Emma nodded, but didn't move. On screen, Nathan was addressing the Sullivan Tech situation. This morning's policy changes aren't about PR or damage control. They're about recognizing our responsibility to the people who make our success possible. Yes, it will cost shareholders money. Yes, the board objects, but some things are worth more than stock prices. Barbara touched Emma's arm. Dr. Reynolds, they're waiting. 1 minute, Emma said softly. Please. Nathan's voice grew stronger. Which brings me to the Mount Sinai situation. Yes, I've involved myself in Dr. Reynolds' case, not because of any improper relationship, but because her story parallels everything wrong with our current systems. We ask medical professionals to make split-second decisions that affect lives, then crucify them when those decisions don't align with our emotional preferences. The journalists erupted with questions. Nathan held up a hand. Dr. Reynolds made the correct medical decision in an impossible situation. I have the data to prove it. But more importantly, she had the courage to make that decision, knowing she would have to live with the consequences. The same courage I'm trying to find now. Emma's pager buzzed again, more insistently this time. She finally looked down. Mr. Reeves requesting you urgently. Conscious, stable. The Wilson family is waiting, Barbara reminded her. Emma straightened her white coat. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. I need to check on a patient first. She found Mr. Reeves awake and alert, his hospital room brightened by morning sunlight. His wife sat beside him, holding his hand. Doctor, he said, his voice weak but clear, I saw the news. About you and that CEO. Emma tensed, but Mr. Reeves smiled. I wanted to thank you, he continued, not just for saving my life, for making the right choice, even when it was hard. The right choice cost another man his life, Emma said quietly. Yes, Mrs. Reeves spoke up, and we've prayed for the Wilson family every day, but you did what you had to do, just like that young man is doing now. She nodded toward the TV in the corner, where Nathan was still speaking. Emma checked Mr. Reeves's vitals, making notes in his chart. You're improving faster than expected. Good, he squeezed his wife's hand. Because I want to testify for you at the hearing. They need to understand what really happened that day. Emma's throat tightened. Mr. Reeves, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. That young CEO isn't the only one who needs to speak truth to power. In the hallway, Emma paused to collect herself. On a nearby TV, Nathan was finishing his press conference. I've been asked if I'm willing to risk my position over these decisions, he was saying. The truth is, I'm more worried about risking my humanity by not making them. Sometimes the most impossible choice is choosing to remain silent. Emma's phone buzzed. A message from Barbara. Wilson family getting impatient. Also, hospital board requesting your presence after. She took a deep breath and started walking toward the conference room. With each step, Nathan's words echoed in her mind. Sometimes the most impossible choice is choosing to remain silent. The Wilson family looked up when she entered. Husband's parents, his widow, photos of his children on the table before them. Their lawyer started to speak, but Emma raised a hand. "Before we begin," she said, her voice steady, "I want to tell you about those 30 seconds. Not the medical facts or the legal arguments. The truth, the whole truth." Outside the conference room, Nathan's press conference was ending. Inside, Emma began to speak, choosing truth over silence, humanity over defense, understanding over justification. Some battles, she was learning, couldn't be won with data or lawyers or press conferences. Some could only be won by opening your heart to the very people who might break it. And in that moment, as she faced the family of the man she couldn't save, Emma finally understood what Nathan had been trying to tell her all along. Sometimes saving yourself meant risking everything you thought you needed to protect. The silence in the conference room was deafening after Emma finished speaking. Mrs. Wilson, Amanda, sat with tears streaming down her face, while her in-laws held hands tightly. The lawyer had stopped taking notes 20 minutes ago, his pen forgotten on the table. "So that's why," Emma concluded softly, "that's why in those 30 seconds I made the choice I did. Not because Mr. Reeves's life was worth more, but because in that moment, with those specific injuries, he had a better chance of survival. I will carry the weight of that decision for the rest of my life." Amanda Wilson wiped her eyes. Was he in pain?" "No," Emma answered truthfully. "He was unconscious from the impact. He didn't suffer." "The hospital's lawyers told us not to meet with you," Mr. Wilson Sr. spoke up. "Said it would compromise the case." "I know." Emma met his eyes. "My lawyers said the same thing." "Then why did you tell us all this?" "Because you deserve to know. Not the medical terminology or legal arguments, but the truth, the human truth." Amanda stood suddenly, walking to the window. Outside, the press was still gathered, hoping for more drama after Nathan's conference. "James always said—" She paused, her voice breaking. "He always said that understanding was more important than being right." She turned back to Emma. "I don't forgive you. Not yet. Maybe not ever, but I understand." The lawyer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Wilson, I should advise you—" "No." Amanda's voice was firm. "No more advice. No more cases. I can't bring James back, and punishing Dr. Reynolds won't help our children." She looked at Emma. "But I want something from you." "Anything," Emma said. "The next time you have to make a choice like that, remember James. Remember that every patient is someone's whole world." "I promise," Emma whispered. As the Wilson family gathered their things to leave, Emma's phone buzzed. A message from Nathan. "Board meeting in an hour. They're voting on my removal. Could use a friend." The hospital board was waiting when Emma left the conference room. Barbara Chen stepped forward. "The Wilsons' lawyer just called," she said. "They're dropping the case." Relief flooded through Emma, followed immediately by guilt. A dropped lawsuit wouldn't bring back James Wilson. "There's something else," Barbara continued. "The board has reviewed your suspension in light of recent events." But Emma was already walking away, her phone in hand. "I need an hour," she called back. "There's somewhere I have to be." The Sullivan Tech boardroom was thick with tension when Emma arrived. Nathan stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable, as William Blackwood read from a prepared statement. "And given these recent actions, which demonstrate a clear departure from the company's established priorities—" "You mean profits over people?" Nathan interrupted. "We mean responsible corporate governance," Blackwood snapped. "This reckless behavior is exactly what this company needs," a new voice said. Everyone turned to see Emma in the doorway, still in her white coat. "Sorry, I'm late." Dr. Reynolds, Blackwood's tone dripped with disdain. This is a private board meeting. Yes, it is. Emma walked to the table. And I'm here because you're about to make a decision based on incomplete information. She placed a file on the table. This is data from every major hospital in New York. Patient outcomes, treatment costs, insurance battles, the human cost of corporate healthcare policies. She met Blackwood's eyes. The same policies Mr. Sullivan is trying to change. This is irrelevant to... It's completely relevant. Emma's voice grew stronger. You're voting on whether to remove a CEO who finally understands that business decisions are human decisions, who's willing to risk everything to make positive change. And we should take advice from a doctor facing a malpractice suit, another board member asked. The Wilsons dropped their case, Emma said quietly. Not because of lawyers or data or PR strategies, because I told them the truth, the whole truth. She looked at Nathan. Something I learned from watching you. Nathan's eyes softened, but before he could speak, his assistant Rebecca burst in. Sir, you need to see this. She turned on the boardroom's TV. The news was showing crowds gathering outside Sullivan Tech offices across the country. Not protesters this time, employees, current and former workers, holding signs supporting Nathan's healthcare changes. Social media was exploding with stories of lives affected by corporate policies and countless messages supporting reform. The market is responding, Rebecca reported. Our stock is up 3 points since the press conference. Competitors' shares are dropping as investors anticipate similar demands for policy changes. Blackwood sputtered. This is the future, Nathan finished. Our companies and hopefully others. So. He looked around the table. Shall we vote? Emma stepped back, watching as hands began to raise. Whatever happened next would change lives, corporate policies, healthcare access, human dignity. She thought of James Wilson, of Mr. Reeves, of Amanda's words about understanding being more important than being right. Nathan caught her eye across the room, and in that moment she saw their parallel journeys for what they were. Two people learning that the hardest choices are often the most necessary ones. Her pager stayed silent. The board members voted. And, somewhere in Manhattan, a new day was unfolding, one where truth had the power to heal more than just bodies or bottom lines. The vote had been close, 8-7 in Nathan's favor, but it was enough. As board members filed out of the room, some resigned, others energized, William Blackwood lingered in the doorway. You've changed this company forever, he said, his voice heavy with something between accusation and respect. I hope you're prepared for the consequences. I am, Nathan replied simply. When the door closed behind Blackwood, he finally allowed himself to sink into his chair, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy coat. Emma stood by the window, watching the crowds below begin to disperse. Your employees are still out there, she observed. They're celebrating. They're hoping, Nathan corrected, joining her at the window. Hope is more dangerous than celebration. It comes with expectations. Expectations you created. She turned to face him. Are you having second thoughts about the policy changes? No. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. About having the strength to see it through? Maybe. That's exactly how I felt after talking to the Wilsons. Emma's voice softened. It's one thing to make a brave choice in the moment. It's another to live with it day after day. The boardroom felt different now, emptier but somehow fuller with possibility. Nathan's phone buzzed with messages from reporters, board members, Rachel. He ignored them all. Have dinner with me, he said suddenly. Emma blinked. What? Dinner. Real dinner, not hospital cafeteria sandwiches at midnight. He smiled. We've shared our worst moments, our impossible choices. Maybe we could try sharing something normal. Nathan, Emma hesitated. The press is still watching. The hospital board is still nervous. Your company is in the middle of a massive transition. Exactly. He stepped closer. Everything is changing anyway. Why not this too? Before she could answer, her pager went off. Emma checked it and her expression shifted. "Mr. Reeves?" Nathan asked. She nodded. His latest tests came back. "The treatment's working better than expected. He might actually—" She caught herself, professional caution taking over. "Might actually what?" "Make a full recovery." Emma's smile was cautious but genuine. Sometimes the impossible cases surprise you, like a doctor and a CEO finding common ground in a hotel room during a rainstorm. Their eyes met, and for a moment the weight of the past few days, the choices, the consequences, the moments of truth, seemed to settle into something new, something possible. Emma's pager buzzed again. She glanced at it and sighed. "The ER. Needs me. We're short-staffed since—" She trailed off. "Since you chose to come to my board meeting instead of handling hospital politics?" Nathan finished. "I'm sorry if I made things more complicated for you." "You didn't make anything complicated," Emma said, gathering her coat. "You just helped me see that some complications are worth facing." She paused at the door. "About dinner?" "Yes? I get off at 8, but I'll need to change out of my scrubs." Nathan felt something in his chest loosen, a tension he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. "I'll pick you up at 9. That little Italian place on Sullivan Street. The one with the terrible Yelp reviews but amazing risotto. You know it? I treated the owner's daughter once. Food poisoning, ironically." Emma smiled. "Not from his restaurant, though." Their laughter felt like breaking through a surface, coming up for air after being underwater too long. When it faded, the silence was comfortable, full of promise. 9 o'clock, Emma confirmed, then hesitated. "Nathan, whatever happens, thank you for reminding me that doing the right thing isn't always about making the right choice. Sometimes it's about facing the choices we've made with honesty." After she left, Nathan stood at the window watching the last of the crowds disperse. His phone buzzed again. Rebecca, with a list of media requests and a draft of the new corporate policies for review. He thought about Emma's words about facing choices with honesty, about Blackwood's warning regarding consequences, about Amanda, Wilson's grief and understanding, about Mr. Reeves's surprising recovery. The sun was setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of possibility. Nathan picked up his phone and began to type. "Rebecca, cancel all interviews for today and find out if that Italian place on Sullivan Street takes reservations. It's time to start living the changes we're trying to make." In the hospital elevator, Emma leaned against the wall, eyes closed, a small smile playing at her lips. Her pager was silent, the weight of the Wilson case lifted, and for the first time in days, she felt something like peace. The doors opened to the controlled chaos of the ER, her familiar battlefield of split-second decisions and lives in the balance. But something was different now. She wasn't just surviving the impossible choices anymore. She was choosing to live them, fully and honestly, wherever they might lead. 1 month later, rain streaked the windows of the Waldorf Astoria, echoing the night that had started everything. Nathan stood in a different suite now, adjusting his cufflinks as he prepared for the evening's charity gala. The Healthcare Innovation Foundation's annual fundraiser had taken on new significance this year, with Sullivan Tech's reformed policies making headlines across the industry. His phone lit up with a message from Emma. "Running late. Emergency surgery went long. Save me some of those tiny appetizers everyone raves about." Nathan smiled, typing back, "The surgeon who can make split-second decisions in the OR is worried about missing hors d'oeuvres. The surgeon who can make split-second decisions is human enough to appreciate good food," came the quick reply, "even if it's served on ridiculous tiny spoons." The past month had brought changes neither of them could have predicted. Sullivan Tech's healthcare initiatives had sparked a movement across the corporate landscape, with three major competitors already announcing similar policy reforms. The Wilson family had established a foundation in James's name, working with hospitals to improve emergency response protocols. And Mr. Reeves had indeed made a full recovery, becoming an unexpected advocate for patient rights and medical staff support. A knock at the door interrupted Nathan's thoughts. He opened it to find William Blackwood. "Didn't expect to see you here," Nathan said, letting him in. "Didn't expect to come." Blackwood looked uncomfortable in his tuxedo. "But your latest quarterly reports are impressive. Stock's up 18% since the changes. Because we're doing the right thing, not in spite of it." "Yes, well..." Blackwood shifted. "Some of us can admit when we're wrong. The board asked me to give you this." He handed over an envelope. "It's unanimous support for the next phase of healthcare initiatives, and..." He hesitated. "My resignation." Nathan took the envelope but didn't open it. "You don't have to resign, William." "Yes, I do. The company's changing. Maybe it's time for old dogs like me to step aside." He managed a slight smile. "Besides, I heard Dr. Reynolds is joining the board as a healthcare advisor. Might be awkward, considering how I spoke about her." "Emma's used to dealing with difficult cases," Nathan replied dryly. "She might surprise you." After Blackwood left, Nathan stood at the window, watching the rain. So much had changed since that first stormy night. His phone buzzed again, Emma sending a photo of herself in a deep blue evening gown, still at the hospital, looking slightly harried but beautiful. "Finally escaped the OR. On my way. By the way, guess who I just treated for a sprained ankle?" "Who?" "The protester from last month, the one with the allergic reaction. He's working in our community outreach program now, helping families navigate insurance appeals." Nathan was still smiling at his phone when another knock came. This time it was Rebecca. "Sir, they're ready for your speech." The ballroom was packed with New York's elite, corporate leaders, medical professionals, media personalities. Nathan approached the podium, adjusting the microphone. Movement at the back of the room caught his eye. Emma slipping in, slightly out of breath, her surgical precision evident in how quickly she'd transformed from doctor to gala attendee. "1 month ago," Nathan began, "I stood in front of cameras and talked about impossible choices, about the decisions we make in boardrooms and emergency rooms that affect people's lives." He paused, finding Emma's eyes in the crowd. "What I didn't say then was that sometimes the most important choices aren't the dramatic ones. They're the quiet decisions we make every day about who we want to be and what really matters." The speech continued, outlining Sullivan Tech's new initiatives and their impact. But Nathan found himself thinking about different moments. Emma's hand in his during their first real dinner. Her laughter when he tried to understand medical terminology. Her strength when facing the hospital board to defend her principles. Later, as the gala wound down, they found themselves back in his suite. Emma kicked off her heels, curling up on the same sofa where they'd first talked. "Full circle," she said, nodding at the rain-streaked windows. "Almost." Nathan sat beside her. "Except this time you have the right room key." "Do I?" She smiled. "I don't know, that wrong key worked out pretty well." Nathan took her hand, tracing the surgeon's calluses on her fingers. "Any impossible choices today?" "Always. But they don't feel impossible anymore." She leaned against him. "Just choices we make and live with, hopefully with grace." Speaking of choices, Nathan reached into his jacket pocket. "The board approved the new initiatives. We're expanding the healthcare division, focusing on improving emergency response systems nationwide." "I heard. Barbara Chen called to congratulate." Me on my new advisory position? Emma's eyes sparkled. I think she's still trying to figure out how a malpractice case turned into all this. And what did you tell her? That sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we need to be. She touched his face gently, even if we don't know it. At the time, outside the rain began to ease, stars peeking through breaks in the clouds. Emma's pager remained silent on the coffee table. Nathan's phone stayed dark in his pocket. For now, there were no emergencies, no corporate crises, no impossible choices demanding their attention. Just two people who had found each other in the midst of life's storms, learning that some choices, the ones that truly matter, aren't impossible at all. They simply require the courage to make them, the strength to live with them, and occasionally, the wisdom to let a wrong room key lead you exactly where you need to be. The end. That was a beautiful story, wasn't it? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Your collaboration is very important to me.